Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all. As I said, I'm going to speak in Português. Bom dia, boa tarde e boa noite a todos. Bem-vindos à primeira sessão do segundo ano do ciclo de encontros Gender Studies and Classical Scholarship, organizado pelo EuGeStA como parte do projeto Estudos de Gênero e Estudos Clássicos. EuGeStA é uma rede europeia de estudos de gênero na antiguidade, que foi fundada pela professora Jacqueline Fabre-Serris, uma latinista da Universidade de Lille, em 2009. Essa rede, ela agrupa pesquisadores de várias áreas de estudos da antiguidade, incluindo estudos de linguagem, literatura, arqueologia, economia, direito, medicina, filosofia, história da arte, religião, estudos de recepção, que compartilham interesse comum em estudos de gênero. Em 2011, uma revista acadêmica, né, foi iniciada, sendo editores a professora Jacqueline de Lille e a professora Judith Hallett, que está aqui, de Maryland. Mais informações sobre esse projeto, EuGeStA, podem ser encontrados no website do projeto. Em uma nova fase dessa rede de estudos na EuGeStA, foi iniciado o ciclo de encontros que já está no seu segundo ano. O objetivo desse projeto é disseminar publicações importantes na área de estudos de gênero e ele ocorre a cada 2 meses, nos semestres letivos. Depois de 4 sessões no ano passado, todas elas foram gravadas e são acessíveis no canal do YouTube do projeto. Nós retomamos as atividades nesse mês e vamos apresentar 2 livros, né, com comentários de autores e de pesquisadores convidados. As sessões vão seguir uma estrutura, como as anteriores, né, a minha introdução à mesa, e depois 15 minutos para cada apresentador e 10 minutos para cada comentador. E, finalmente, 25 minutos de uma discussão geral. Essas questões e comentários podem ser feitos brevemente, por favor, por chat ou por voz. A próxima página. Assim, a sessão está prevista para durar 1 hora e 20 minutos, com 10 minutos a mais, se necessário. Eu não serei draconiana no tempo, mas eu peço que todos tentem seguir esse roteiro. Essa atividade é uma atividade multilingüe, o inglês é a linguagem principal, mas tanto os comentadores como os respondentes podem também, e os participantes, falar na sua linguagem preferida, francês, espanhol, italiano, português. O que nós pedimos, em geral, é que uma versão em inglês, nesse caso, seja projetada na tela, como está ocorrendo agora. O objetivo desse modo, né, de apresentação é dar visibilidade e ampliar a possibilidade de participação de pessoas de várias partes do mundo. O objetivo também dos comentadores é destacar algum aspecto do livro, não é uma resenha, não é uma ampla apresentação do livro. Hoje, nessa sessão, nós teremos 2 livros sendo apresentados. Imprints of Dance in Ancient Greece and Rome, que foi publicado pela Universidade Autônoma de Madrid, em 2024, e foi editado por Zoa Alonso Fernández e Sarah Olsen. Zoa é professora contratada doutora do Departamento de Estudos Clássicos da Universidade Autônoma de Madrid. E Sarah é professora associada de Classics no Williams College, nos Estados Unidos. A comentadora respondente será a professora Ruth Webb, da Université Charles de Gaulle, Lille, Troyes. O segundo livro é Female Agents in the Ancient Mediterranean, publicado pela Liverpool University Press e foi editado por Karolina Frank, professora no Departamento de História Antiga da Universidade de Varsóvia, Greg Gilles, independent scholar, Christine Plasto, lecturer in classical studies na Open University, e Lewis Webb, lecturer in Roman history at the Merton College and at the Faculty of Classics, University of Oxford. A respondente será Maria Cristina de la Escosura Balbás, professora de História Antiga em la Universidade de Alcalá. Antes de passar a palavra aos expositores, eu gostaria de agradecer a Sofia Moraes e Caio Franco, estudantes de mestrado em Estudos Clássicos e em Filosofia, respectivamente, da Universidade Federal de Minas Gerais, no Brasil, a qual também eu pertenço, pelo apoio técnico. Então, eu passo agora a palavra para a primeira expositora, que é Zoá Alonso. I give you the floor, Zoá, please. Thank you.
Muito obrigada, Maria Cecília. Thank you so much to both of you, to you and to Jacqueline, also Judith, and all the other people that makes possible this amazing opportunity that you are giving many of us with this wonderful floor. And also, of course, thank you to Ruth for willing to be respondent of our book, a book that is going to be accompanied by a wonderful other publication, which is I'm so much looking forward to listen to what you have to say about that other book. So I will be only speaking for 5 minutes. Unfortunately, Sarah Olsen won't be here today. She regretted very much, but I am accompanied on her behalf instead of her by Rosa Andújar and Karin Schlappbach, two of the co-authors of the book, and so I'm pretty sure they will have wonderful things to say instead of me and Sarah. So I'm going to share my screen for a second, if you don't mind. Can you see my PowerPoint? I just wanted to share a few images of the book and of the whole process, of the whole project we've been creating in the past few years as part of these imprints of dance in ancient Greece and Rome, especially for the purposes of the Spanish language, because this is a book that was part of a research project that began in 2020, the year of the pandemic, and was granted by the Spanish Society for Classical Studies, Sociedad Española de Estudios Clásicos, y la Fundación BBVA Foundation. It was called Improntas de Danza Antigua, Textos, Cuerpos, Imágenes, Movimiento. And it allowed us to carry out this multidisciplinary research on ancient dance. Of course, the aim of the book, the aim of the project would be to take into account all the many publications that have been coming up in the past 2 decades in the field of ancient dance studies, and taking advantage as well of the good health of dance studies more broadly, to think of something that could be of use for students in our areas and scholars in other areas, not necessarily close to the ancient world or to the discipline of dance per se. So Sarah and I, in particular, together with other 6 colleagues, and I'm bringing here one of our famous meetings because it was during the pandemic, as I was saying, the 8 of us, Rosa Andújar, Laura Gianvittorio Ungar, Sarah Olsen, Lauren Curtis, Caroline Laferrière, Naomi Weiss, and Karin Schlappbach, and myself, spent a year and a half, like everybody, using Zoom for this kind of purposes. We, of course, had a lot of teaching, research, administrative, and even care weights and things to do. But this project gave us the opportunity to think of something that united us. So it was a project created by 8 women, a project that was really interdisciplinary. There were Latinists, Hellenists, specialists in literature, in language, in ancient art, But above all, it was also an international research project, and we were very proud of that aspect. And I'm saying this because an important part of this project was that the book is also coming in Spanish very shortly. It has been like created a whole other book, because most of you, how difficult it is to translate. So here, in addition to all the translations of Greek and Roman materials, we also had to think in different languages. And something very beautiful was to perceive that in addition to English, there were other languages behind those texts written like by Karen, who thinks in German, or myself thinking in Spanish, or Laura thinking in Italian. So it was pretty cool to go away with this process. I just wanted to let you know that the main structure of this book depends on 8 important chapters. Each of those tackles different questions that have proven to be interesting to think ancient dance from many different perspectives, but specifically through a thematic distribution. So the themes here that we have: geography, space, body, audience, movement, objects, politics, and gods, are also important to think of the practice of ancient dance, ancient corporeality, ancient mobility, ancient choreography from many different perspectives. And of course, these perspectives include gender studies, queer studies, post-colonial studies, race studies. So we really wanted to think on the many possibilities that the human body and the agency of dancing bodies through the lenses of various objects, of various texts, and different materials that have been on purpose and intentionally recurring over the different chapters. So with this in mind, and taking the critical theories that dance studies have led to us, but in particular, those critical dance studies that also dialogue with the other fields that are interesting to us today, specifically gender and identity more broadly, we came up with this book that we are presenting today. And I'm sorry for being very, very practical, but I know that people are having trouble in finding the book online and to purchasing the book. It is going to be open access for free in only 2 months. So for those who have difficulties in having the book sent to the different countries, if you wait only 2 more months, the book will be electronically available for everyone for free in our university website. The Spanish version will have to wait for another 12 months. But, well, this is the price we have to get. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and I'm going to just quote my dear colleague, Sarah, when she repeatedly said that this is not a final word, this book, but the start of a new conversation, or the start of many other conversations that were already in the air for all these years. So thank you so much. And I'm going to leave the floor to my friend. Maybe Rosa, you want to talk first, and then Karin? I never spoke in Spanish in the end. So muchísimas gracias. Y Rosa, es todo tuyo.
Thank you, gracias. Just very briefly, I'm just going to sort of elaborate a little bit more on sort of the collaborative nature of our project. So you may see that obviously it's a book and it looks like an edited volume. It has these thematic chapters, but I just kind of, in case it's not immediately apparent to you with that format, that the nature of the book is such that each chapter is basically informed by a whole number of conversations that we've had. And in fact, also even examples that sort of are, that we thought of as a group in order to sort of fit into these wider categories. So we came up together with these sort of, these categories of sort of geography, space, movement, objects. I mean, as though I was mentioning, to do with what we think is important in terms of sort of dance studies, or in terms of capturing what is unique to, say, ancient dance, like gods, for example. But in general, so we wanted to do this sort of thematic approach, and obviously covering both Greek and Roman antiquity. But at the same time, you know, we were very clear that our focus was not reconstruction. There's a lot of reconstruction in terms of dance out there. There's a lot of good work out there, but we were more interested in, again, bringing ancient dance studies in conversation with modern dance studies, where, again, you know, the frameworks are different. So we came up with those general categories. And what I mean by the collaborative mode of, in our collaborative mode, was that each person kind of chose a topic, and then basically would go away and sort of think about what is current in dance studies or in gender studies, you know, sort of in relation to that topic. I chose geography, but for me, I'm very much interested in race making and antiquity, and thinking about how that plays out. And there's a lot of wonderful work in terms of dance studies on thinking about the racialized body. So, I mean, in my example, you know, so I and others, you know, came up with our own framework, you know, sort of, we kind of came up to each meeting with a document, sort of a 2-3 page document, where we had outlined sort of major interventions in other adjacent, or, you know, sort of sibling fields and our own concerns. And everybody, this was circulated before the meeting, and everybody would come in with examples from antiquity that would be interesting or compelling or fascinating to think about with that framework. So even though each person wrote their own chapter, everything was pretty much, as I said, informed and guided by everyone else's sort of examples and input as well, because we also co-edited. We had a couple of in-person meetings after our wonderful Zoom collaborations, and I have to say, it was one of the, I mean, for me, this was one of the best things about the pandemic. This was such a source of joy when there's so much stress and other things going on. But when we actually, so, you know, one of our later in-person meetings, we kind of workshopped each other's chapters. So that's just to say that, yeah, it was not only interdisciplinary, international, but it was also fundamentally collaborative, though it may not be reflected in the format that you see. Thank you. Maybe Karen, you want to say something else?
Yes, thank you very much. Hello, everybody. Maybe what Rosa just said, the collaborative mode that we were working in, explains how I ended up working on objects, which wasn't necessarily what I would have picked at the start, but it really happened in the conversation and in the exchange. And it was a very good chapter because it was so useful in widening the perspective and in questioning this idea that in order to dance, all you need is your body, because you need much more. You need the space, you need probably an audience, you need a context, and you need objects, material objects. And in a way, the human body with its mobility and agency is at the opposite end of a spectrum of possible movement from inert material objects. But the work on my chapter helped me to really go beyond this alternative and realize how central objects are in dance. So not only as kinesthetic objects, where maybe a huge cloak affects the way you move, or a heavy object will alter the way you move, but also as signifying objects, in that a material object can identify the character you're impersonating, or tell an important part of the story. But the most interesting thing for me, the discovery, was perhaps material objects as actual markers of dance. Because I came across this interesting passage in Lucretius, where the invention of dance is described. And the question is, how do you show that you're dancing when no one knows yet what that is? And the answer is, you put a garland on your head. And I found various examples, for instance, the shields of the Salian priests, that show how fundamental material objects are for dance. So in the context of today's meeting, I thought that was a great way of letting go of this anthropocentric way of thinking about dance, and realize how much it allows one to be connected with the environment, with the physical space, with other people, and with the natural world as well. And so in a way, my object was perhaps very connected to the way we worked together. It was very much in sync with the way that the project came about, and that has been described by Zoa and Rosa. So I don't want to take more time. I'm mindful of the schedule, so maybe we can hand over to Ruth.
Thank you very much. Thank you all three. As it is in the program, now you have the second book presented, and then after it, Ruth will come. We'll have the comments after the two books are presented, if you don't mind. Okay? Thank you very much. So then,
and I will, yes, take off if that's fine with you. Thank you. I would like to begin by thanking again Maria, Cecília, Jacqueline, and EuGeStA Network for organizing this session and inviting me to speak. The book that I will be discussing today is the edited volume Female Agency in the Ancient Mediterranean, published last year by Liverpool Press, and here is the lovely book. It is the fruit of much labor on the part of my co-editors, Dr. Greg Giles, Dr. Christine Plasov from the Open University, Dr. Lewis Webb from the University of Oxford, and the scholars who authored the various chapters. I can also proudly say that it is the inaugural publication of the Liverpool University Press's new Women in Ancient Cultures series. Today, I would like to speak to you as both a co-editor and contributor to this volume. Just quick introduction, my name is Karolina Frank, and I am an adjunct at the Faculty of History at the University of Warsaw, and my research explores northwestern Greece during the classical and Hellenistic periods with a focus on epigraphy, religion, and of course, gender. The idea for our Female Agency in the Ancient Mediterranean book originated during the Women in Ancient Cultures conference series, which was held on a biweekly basis from January to June 2021, and was met with a lot of interest. This too, fun fact, is another COVID book, basically. We had to rearrange the scheduling of the conferences due to restrictions. When we conceptualized this volume and sort of were deciding on the choice of papers, my co-editors and I looked for themes and commonalities sort of in the presentations that we saw. One element that vividly stood out to us was the recurring topic of women's agency, their ability to act and make decisions. So we sort of decided to pull on that thread and making this into a study of female agency and kind of embracing that aspect of the papers. The aim for our book was twofold. So on the one hand, we wanted to present a series of case studies that would demonstrate women's ability to act across different time periods and geographic regions. And by collecting them into one volume and setting them sort of by side, we hope to offer readers a broad range of examples of how and why women were able to exercise their agency, as well as the similarities between the different manifestations of said agency. On the other hand, we didn't really want to simply throw information at the reader without providing any framework through which to examine these situations. So we sort of tried to look into that and create our own. Sort of more recently, scholarship has increasingly used the term of female agency to examine how women, sort of despite their impressive conditions, could attain power, independence, or even self-confidence. However, the more traditional definitions of agency often frame it as a largely inaccessible thing, not only for most women, but also, many men and non-binary individuals. Sort of this makes it especially difficult to apply the concept to women in the ancient Mediterranean. So one key challenge that we faced was the idea that agency requires freedom from coercion or external control. In ancient Mediterranean societies, many women, depending on their social class, were largely bound to male guardians, complicating the conventional notion of autonomy. Another issue was the emphasis on self-awareness, where agency is tied to recognizing one's own needs and rights. Since we have so few female-authored texts that survive, assessing women's agency through this lens is somewhat problematic. While recognizing these limitations, the goals that we sort of set for ourselves as editors was to develop guidelines for approaching the scarce sources by and about women, maximizing what we could learn from them and refining how we understand female agency in the ancient world. So when we talk about female agency, one of the biggest challenges is defining what we actually mean, by women and agency in the first place. Anti-essentialist perspectives have questioned whether sort of the category of woman is even a stable one, which, while important for avoiding rigid definitions, also raises a major concern. If we can't define women as a group, how can we study their ability to act? To answer to this question, we turned to some modern scholarship that we found particularly productive. Some researchers argue that despite differences in culture and experience, women still share structural commonalities that create a basis for collective struggle. This idea is crucial because it shifts the focus from individual empowerment to collective agency. So the power of people acting together to challenge oppression. Albert Bandura's work on collective agency sort of reminded us that most social change happened not through isolated individuals, but through coordinated efforts built on shared beliefs and mutual support. And then this was taken even further, emphasizing that agency itself is relational. So it emerges through interaction rather than being something that a person simply has. Sort of most influentially for us were Peta Boden's and Jane Memory's sort of theories that they argue that unless we see women as members of a group, we risk missing the broader patterns of oppression that require collective resistance. They stress the importance of recognizing shared experiences to build political consciousness and drive meaningful social change, especially for those who are most marginalized. So as a result, in our volume, we took a relational and multidimensional approach to female agency. Instead of looking only at so-called exceptional individuals, we focused on how groups and women in the ancient world acted within constraints of their societies. We also drew additional inspiration from several other methodologies, such as the concept of women's fields of action, champ d'action, used by Sandra Boringer and Violaine Siblot-Cuchet, as well as Kimberly Crenshaw's intersectional framework. Ultimately, we hope that our approach, which is laid out in the introduction, manages to recognize that agency isn't just about acting alone, it's about acting in relation to others, within and against the structures that shape our lives. Okay, to sort of move away a little bit from the theoretical foundation, I would like to discuss a little bit more at what each chapter offers. We kind of organized the chapters chronologically, or more or less chronologically, tracing shifts in female agency across the ancient Mediterranean from the 7th century BCE to the 6th century CE. Our contributors draw from a wide range of non-literary sources. So again, we have the element of sort of material culture, inscriptions, papyri, and letters, placing them in dialogue with a more traditional literary text tradition. Many also focus on early or less dominant cultural groups, which offers a fresh perspective on women's roles in antiquity. Their research strikes a balance, at least in my opinion, between detailed local case studies and broader regional trends, kind of moving between the personal and the public to best demonstrate the diverse ways women exercise agency in their societies. The first chapter was written by Catherine MacDonald, and it examines female agency in pre-Roman Italy, exploring women's roles in votive dedications, burials, and memorialization across different regions. MacDonald analyzes variations in inscriptions to assess differences in female agency and visibility, arguing that participation varied by city, but could also be inferred where inscriptions are a bit more scarce and less present. She highlights substantial evidence for women's involvement, particularly in religious leadership, and suggests that female visibility increases during periods of conflict. potentially linking it to elite identity formation and amidst the Roman expansion. Next, we kind of move over to Greece, which is more my specialty. The first two Greek articles, the first two out of the Greek articles was written by Melanie Meeker, who explores female participation in the Hippikoi Agonis, so horses and chariot racing between the 4th century BC and 1st century CE. Through epigraphic evidence and a series of case studies of prominent female victors, such as the Spartan princess Kaniska, she argues that women's involvement was more widespread than previously believed. Unlike in other domains, these women did not have to share their victories with male relatives, making horse racing one of the rare public arenas where wealthy women could compete directly against men and gain personal recognition and prestige. The following chapter is my own. In it, I decided to focus on women's inquiries at the Oracle of Dodona in Epirus, highlighting their agency, particularly in northwestern Greece, as different from the sort of accepted Athenian norms. I have argued that consulting the Oracle allowed women to influence key aspects of their lives, from marriage to childbirth, to financial and legal status. By seeking divine guidance, so often concerning ritual practices, women managed to sort of engage with a network of divine power that enhanced their control over personal and household affairs and made them into active sort of shapers of their own fate. The remaining of our texts provide a wide range of perspectives on the experiences and agency of Roman women. James Townsend, for example, re-examines their role as witnesses, challenging assumptions about their legal agency. While we know that tutela limited their rights, women still could engage in legal transactions. The author proposes that there is at least one woman that we know of that acted as an instrumental witness, directly exercising agency in this scenario. He also introduces the concept of secondary agency, where women chose to act on behalf of others, thus offering a new explanation of how women gained the capacity to testify in court. Next up, we have Brenda Longfellow's study that examines Pompeian women's agency through their funerary inscriptions, and reveals that Pompeii as a rare site where women's needs, desires, and actions were visible across social classes. So using tombs built by women as a case study, she argues that dedicatory inscriptions show that women frequently commissioned tombs acting as agents for themselves. Next, Shanshan Wan's chapter examines female benefactions in the Roman West, so 1st to 3rd century CE, focusing on epigraphic evidence of women's role in public feasting. The author identifies 4 groups of female benefactors: senatorial women, relatives of equestrians, municipal elites, and freedwomen, and explores their motivations, including status enhancement, social obligations, and female networks. The following article moves us a little bit further into Roman Dalmatia. In it, Anne Namech takes a closer look at the women's religious roles, using archaeological and epigraphic evidence to highlight their agency in public religious life. She successfully, in my opinion, demonstrates that women served as priestesses, benefactresses, and patrons and of temples and inscriptions, actively shaping the religious spaces in Dalmatia. She concludes that women's role were far from marginal. They competed for public recognition, they influenced other women, and significantly contributed to the visibility of female religiosity in the province. Finally, we have Paula Tatti's chapter, which focuses on a later time period, letters of women to religious figures between the 4th and 6th century CE. These women sought assistance, ranging from prayers to legal aid, which allowed women to influence events within the social constraints. Tatti also highlights how monks, who were embedded in the social and political networks, sort of on a more like local level, served as allies and power brokers for women. To conclude our book and sort of tie everything together, we reached out to our very own Professor Judith Hallett. We asked if she would be willing to write a final chapter tying together the key themes for the volume, and she very graciously agreed to do so. In her sort of conclusions chapter, Professor Hallett explores the agency of 4 well-documented female writers. So we have Anactoria, Cornelia, Sulpicia, and Claudia Severa, arguing that the very act of writing was a powerful form of self-assertion in a society that often restricted women's autonomy. Through their words, these women expressed their thoughts, their desires, demonstrating a distinct form of agency. Their examples reflect the broader findings of our volume, showing that many ways that women in the ancient Mediterranean exercised agency, both individually and collectively. We hope, in general, that this volume clearly reflects the conclusions that both we and our contributors reached independently, yet which resonate throughout all the chapters. First, we argue that the study of women's agency needs to be redefined, requiring a fresh perspective, one that we have aimed to provide. Second, we emphasize that access to key resources, whether financial assets, religious connections, or participation in important social interactions, enabled women in ancient Greece and Rome to exercise agency and even exert some control in various areas of life. While the influence may not have been of equal sort of quality as that of men, it certainly was comparable in meaningful ways. And with this, I conclude my talk. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Karolina. Now, please, Professor Ruth Webb.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the invitation. I managed to find the book, which is in our Bibliothèque des Sciences d'Antiquité in Lille. So it is. It's available certainly in the north of France. It's a really fantastic volume. I've had a really great time reading it. Both fantastic for the contents and the way it's been organized, and you've already spoken about that, and the way that each chapter takes an aspect of dance itself, the body, the objects, the movements, or of the context and implications of performance, like geography, space, audience, politics, and then the gods. And in the introduction, you described that as being a process of zooming in from the geography, the Rosa's chapter, zooming into the actual dance, and then zooming back out again and ending up with the gods, which I think really works well. And the chapters really work with each other. I'm sure that, and I know that everyone who edits a collected volume really wants all the chapters to work together and to speak together and to be like a conversation. But it rarely happens like that because the editors are always subject to the timetables and the constraints of their contributors, which always get in the way. But here, you've really managed to produce something which works as a unit. Possibly, it sounds like lockdown was actually a good thing. Lockdown actually helped you to do that by getting you together, paradoxically. I was intrigued from the start, as soon as I heard about the volume, by the use of the term imprint in the title. I wondered if what you meant was impression, but now I've got it in between my hands, I can see, no, it really is imprint. And it's a really appropriate term for an art that isn't directly accessible to us at our chronological distance and can only be perceived through the traces it's left indirectly. And as the contributions make clear in their different ways, these imprints are most often not even traces of the dance itself, but they are traces of the responses of contemporary viewers and contemporary members of society to dance, responses that are deeply enmeshed in different discourses, different sets of values. And that's what makes dance and its imprints such a rich topic of research. This may not work. I'm thinking now of it doesn't work at all, but I'll try it anyway. What's just come to mind is the image of the Kinder egg, because the dance is like the toy in the middle that is contained within this shell, but the shell itself gives access to the thing in the middle, but it isn't it, but it has its own value and its own interest. If that works, good. If not, I'll work on a different analogy. I'm sure that as you were hoping, that this book will be a very fertile ground for future studies, for all sorts of reasons. There's the wealth of ancient material. You've got texts with a wonderful index locorum, a lot of images, and that's complex in itself to get all these images together, gather them together to get the permissions and everything for the publishing, and ghosts of ancient performance practices, and also because it's stimulating because of the use of contemporary theory and analogies drawn from contemporary society and contemporary performance. So you mobilize in the different chapters performance and dance studies, post-colonial studies, as we've already heard, feminist and queer studies, and a lot more. Another original aspect of the book is the diachronic nature of the chapters. As specialists, we've tended to keep to our chronological lane, and that's totally justifiable if you're taking a contextual approach. The function and connotations of dance in archaic Sparta, say, or classical Athens, or late antique Antioch, are very, very different. In fact, you could even ask whether these practices can all be seen under the same category. And I would have been skeptical about the chronological range of each chapter, because in each chapter you cover a whole range of periods. But the juxtapositions really work, and I think that's for several reasons. The individual chapters do bring out the distinctions, although you range very widely from archaic material up into late antiquity. In some cases, the distinctions remain clear. And the great thing is that it allows us to draw connections that we don't see in more chronologically restricted studies. In Rosa's chapter, you really bring out the importance of borders that are crossed by dance and dancers, literally when dance is imported and exported, and metaphorically with dancers' crossings of frontiers of identity and gender. And you show how that works in all the different periods. And there's an interesting connection here with Sarah Olsen's chapter on the body, which asks whether the Syrian, in inverted commas, dancer in the pseudo-Virgilian Copa Surisca, which also comes up in Naomi Weiss's chapter in a slightly different way, whether she dances the way she does in the poem, in the fictional world of the poem, because she's of Syrian origin, or whether she becomes Syrian through the style of her dancing, whether her identity is constructed through her action. Another reason that the wide chronological range works, and I think is so fruitful, is that the one-word titles really get to the essence of dance. And we're really into dance when we get to movement, body, and object. And object, Karen has already mentioned the way in which she talks about, with contemporary parallels, very interesting contemporary parallels, the way in which the dancing body can control objects and costumes, masks, spark balls, and weapons, and sometimes be an object. You talk about the falling body, the unbalanced body, and that was really interesting. And Zoa's own chapter on movement points out the embodied turn that's allowed us to articulate the ways in which reading and viewing can never be purely cerebral, even though we used to think of it in that sense, and how the reading of a text like Catullus 61 really involves us in a bodily way, just like the actual audiences of ancient dance, which Naomi discusses in her chapter, are involved bodily. Time is one of the chapters that could have been part of this book on dance. I suppose I was wondering if there were others that you wanted to do, but you didn't have space or you couldn't find someone to do them. It's there all the time because of the traveling between periods and between contemporary theories and examples and the ancient world. And I would add that the publication itself is of its time because of the current emphasis in scholarship on classics, on embodied practices and embodied reception. Jonas Gretlijn's work on experience in ancient aesthetics is one of the secondary sources that several people cite. Another concept which really helps us think and talk about dance is that of kinesthesia and the kinesthetic. And it really made me reflect on or realize how difficult it was when I first started thinking about writing about dance in the ancient world, which I'm horrified to realize is now 30 years ago. But it's interesting to see that difference in time. In those days, certainly in classics, it was incredibly difficult to find the words. I knew what I wanted to say. I've always done a lot of dance in my life. I knew experientially what was happening, what I wanted to convey, but I did not have the words. It was one of the most difficult things that I have ever written at the time when I wrote it. As this is an event for EuGeStA, I wanted to say a few words about gender in relation to this volume, and that article that came out in 1997 was for a book about gender in Byzantium, Liz James's Gender in Byzantium. There isn't a chapter on gender, but there's, I think, really no need, because gender runs through the whole like a nerve in a body. Much more than the few pages in the index under the term suggest. That was the first thing I did, was to go to the index and look up gender and think, there's not going to be anything for me to say for EuGeStA here. But in fact, all the individual chapters come to it. It's so deeply ingrained in the project. I've already mentioned the reading of the Syrian girl, the Syriska, in the Pseudo-Virgilian poem. And if her ethnicity is constructed in the dance, her gender certainly is simultaneously constructed. There are also, of course, the mentions of pantomime dancers and their fluid gender identity. And Zoa, I was really struck by your reading of the Erechthion Caryatids, pointing out how they're eternally caught in this restrained posture between motion and stillness. And you mentioned the Vitruvian etiological story about them being slaves made to carry a heavy burden as something you don't want to take literally, but it seemed to me that was a very really points out the gendered nature both of the burden they carry and of their arrested motion. So it's worth noting that these considerations of gender are omnipresent in this publication without needing to be explicitly signaled, and it really shows how much work has been done over the past few decades. One question I had is about the list of authors. You are all women. Was that a deliberate choice, or was that just how it turned out? I don't want to anticipate the discussion now.
Well, if I interrupt you, I think it was delivered since the very beginning. We had to apply for this research project. It was a very competitive call, and there was something there to say, no, let's go for all women, an all women project. And I don't know, it turned out that way, but it turned out very well in the end. I think we all did. So yeah.
Thank you. Well, that was the end of my comments anyway, so you haven't interrupted me, but thank you very much for getting me to comment and to participate today.
Thank you very much, Professor Webb. Now I give the floor to Cristina Balbás, please.
Good afternoon. Thank you all. I need to do a capta tu benevolentia. I'm jet-lagged, so bear with me. Okay, so my aim is to highlight two cross-cutting themes addressed in the volume and connect them with theoretical inquiries I have developed in written modes, last at the University of Buenos Aires, dialoguing with the students and colleagues in political theory and philosophy, but also in Belo Horizonte in 2024. I hope this aligns with Cecília and Jacqueline's directive to focus on critical aspects or phenomena intersecting with the book's core theme. First, I propose a critical examination of whether studies grounded in epigraphic evidence have sufficiently accounted for the random nature of preservation. The book commendably avoids homogenizing epigraphy into artificial ethnic categories, often invented by Greek or Roman authors, and instead centers the city as both a geographic and juridical unit. However, preservation biases intrinsically tied to towns' histories merit, I think, deeper engagement in the analysis. The second one, larger one. The volume prioritizes three axes: religious expressions, legal aspects, and economic capacity. Rereading the volume through the lens of my ongoing research on performative citizenships and Roman women has proven analytically fruitful, and let me contextualize this. Roman citizenship is structurally defined by its dialectical relationship with otherness. The conflaction of Rome as a city with Rome as empire obscures the plurality of peripheries, as Anamex and analyzed in Dalmatia and Roman Dalmatia demonstrates. Roman signifiers cannot be uncritically mapped onto peripheral societies, religion, or modes of governance. Center-periphery dynamics, inseparable from coloniality, necessitate decolonial and feminist frameworks to interrogate female agency. So Roman citizenship hinge on property and its fiscal obligation and legal personhood. They intersect at multiple levels, familial for us. For example, on tutelage explores in several chapters of this book. And also civitas, also central for the book. Building on this, my work interrogates whether Roman citizenship is performative or performed. Performative citizenship, exemplified by Athens, demands active participation, is territorially bound, and reinforces female invisibility. Greek chapters in the volume don't align with this kind of citizenship. So it functions because in contrast, Roman citizenship is performed, I think, passive in participation, relevant outside of Rome, consider Paul of Tarsus, and visibility depends on class rather than gender. This aligns with the book's recurring theme. It's not a gender bias, it's a class bias so many times if women can or cannot express agency, female agency. So, however, as Rome spans across the Mediterranean, the privilege of Roman citizenship was the same for periphery inhabitants. elite Roman was the same as the poor. Regardless of class, gender, prestige, status, or religion, all Romans had citizen rights. To distinguish themselves, the Roman aristocracy began performing citizenship in a Greek style or Athenian style manner. A prime example is Lucius Caelius Metellus, Laudatio Funebris, around 2021 BCE, which codifies aristocratic but not citizen virtues. And similar strategies emerged in the first chapter, MacDonald Studies on Pro-Roman Italic Agency, Female Agency, and subsequent provincial emergentism analysis also. So it was great to look with new eyes at my own, with your eyes at my own research. And because my research challenged the persistent denial of Roman female citizenship. Yet, Roman women met the criteria of property ownership and legal standing. And Gaius Institutiones systematically refers to them as cives Romanae, just as it does for men. And feminist scholarship demands consistency. We cannot apply a double standard. Either we question both of Gaius cives Romanae, or neither. So the critical follow-up is, did elite Roman women perform citizenship comparably to men? The book Gaius studies suggest parity, except when gender intersected with other hierarchies. My prior work on Republican era literary, numismatic, and epigraphic evidence supports this also. Elite women perform citizenship religiously, as we can see all through the book, but also on the December festival of Bonadea hosted by Consul's wife, publicly, also visible in the Verditism, but not only, also in the studies on women as testifiers. But we have other examples as Munichia of Paestum, who minted coins bearing her image in Republican times, and she funded family monuments. And also politically, because all is political. And I think Cornelia is the best sample and more or less concludes the book. And in the Cornelia, when discusses in the epilogue, embodies this duality. The Augustan era pedestal, labeling her Doctor of Africanus and Mother of the Gracchi, reflects her historical erasure, reduced from a political agent, as the as the epilogue in the volume says, to a maternal archetype, stripped of civic personhood to serve imperial ideology. And I think this completes more or less where feminists and decolonialism studies are going through this vein, I think. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Cristina. Well, now, as usual, we give the floor to the first speakers so they can answer or comment, their commenters. And after this, we open to the question or comments for the whole public. I don't know if Zoe and Rosa and...
Yes, of course. Thank you so much, Maria Cecilia. And thank you, Ruth. Thank you so much, because hearing you saying all these things about our book is just like, you know, a dream come true. It's like a gift. Of course, you've seen your name quoted and cited in every chapter, all this increase about a female body in Byzantium, but beyond, and the pantomimic body. So to us, it means a lot. You have really understood our purposes and our sorry, something appeared in the little screen, that you have really understood our purposes and our interests and our goals. So I think there's nothing I can say but thanking you, because I feel very proud.
There was my question. Were there other chapters that you had thought of?
Yes, indeed. Time was there, actually. It was in the very beginning, one of the chapters, also, I think, words and music. But because of the music aspect, we decided that either words or music would be incorporated as gender is incorporated. So I think we also mentioned labor or even senses. So it was difficult to get rid of one of them, but time was indeed in the original application. There was one chapter for time, and something that makes me think of this is that the fact that even the order of the chapters was voted by all of us. In one of these meetings, we all voted and had our own reflections about how to zoom in and zoom out and which chapter should be before and after the other. So the collaborative effort even reached those levels.
Okay, thank you. Rosa, Karen, any comments?
Just to say thank you. Thank you for reading and engaging. I'm also, like Zoe, really incredibly happy with your comments, because you were such an inspiration, obviously, in all the chapters, you and your work. And I'm so glad that, yeah, I mean, you know, that you picked up on the fact that certain things like gender were very much like sort of a crucial, like a beating heart of the volume, even though it's sort of not marked as such. Thank you.
I would like to thank you too for your generous remarks. And I was really interested by what you said about the 30 years that have gone by when you were the first one inventing basically a new field of research within classics, and we are benefiting from it now. But I also found while working on this project and presenting it also at the Dance Association Congress last summer in Argentina, that it remains a challenge to actually talk beyond our own discipline and have a dialogue, and we have to build it constantly. For instance, even how we perceive figures like Isadora Duncan or Aloy Fuller, who for me are inventive and subversive, and they refer back to antiquity, but in a sort of wild way. And then it's the reception that they experienced by critics who thought that, oh, here are the reconstructions of ancient Greek dance. And then they are sort of contained in this reception and become new classical performers who are perceived now, as I realized, as kind of conservative because they reach back to classical antiquity. So it's been really interesting to engage with dance studies and to talk to colleagues in this field and to realize how certain things are perceived when you're outside our own little world.
Okay, thank you. Well, now, Karolina, if you would like to comment or...
Yes, thank you. I'll say something and maybe Christine will want to add in a moment. Okay, so Cristina, thank you so much, if I may, first name basis, thank you so much for your commentary and for a sort of an interesting comparison, sort of putting together all of the different aspects. I regret to say that our sort of Roman specialists were not able to attend because I feel like they would have been sort of the perfect people to engage with your commentary. But I did have some of my own thoughts sort of on what you've mentioned. You started by kind of referencing an issue that all of us epigraphists and people who study sort of non-traditional literary texts have, the bias of the preservation bias, the bias of not necessarily knowing how much we actually have of the text. So that was an issue that I found, even myself as an author in this, that we sort of faced when dealing with this. As an editor, we were kind of hoping to counterbalance this by providing the reader with a number of different case studies, so that while, again, perhaps we don't have a exceptionally good understanding of any of these women, but together, by comparing them and contrasting, we can sort of counterbalance the lacks in material that we have. You mentioned sort of the performative and performed citizenship, which I found was very interesting. I do tend to agree with what you said, that certain elements of the performative and performed kind of mingling together, especially in the later Roman chapters, does appear. Class bias is definitely an issue. Again, sort of having different case studies, that was our hope to counterbalance some of these problems. Likewise, the comparison to men, I think, is an important point. This perhaps was not necessarily the focus of our book, but it is an issue that I find scholars studying gender and women's history have to contend with a little bit more so. You can't really study women without the men, and you can't really study the men without the women, and sort of having broader comparative elements in the studies are necessary. I don't know if Christine, you would like to add something perhaps?
Yeah, thanks. Hi, everybody. I'm Christine Plasto. I was one of the other editors. Karolina's done a brilliant job of talking about our volume today, so I thought I would mostly leave it to her. Yeah, thank you so much, Cristina, for your responses. It's really, what was really lovely about your response for me was what I enjoyed so much about working on this volume. I'm a Hellenist and specifically a classical Athens in the classical period person, a very women light kind of topic in terms of actual voices and authentic kind of evidence that isn't hugely ideologically shaded. And so it was so exciting to me to see how the theoretical material that we were sort of trying to pull through all of the chapters could be applied in all of these different settings. And that was what was so interesting to me about your response as well, was also thinking about, okay, what does this give us? What way of reading does this approach to women's agency allow us to do? And I think for me, the most important aspect of that was the relational element, which we highlight in our introduction, and thinking about, well, as Karolina said, we were interested to try and highlight scenarios which were not only women who had exceptional access to power because they were the emperor's wife or somebody in an unusual position of power where they may have an unusual access to agency, but where there may have been a more group element to that agency. And that's sort of where the relationality came in for me, where actually when you think beyond those traditional very kind of masculinist conceptions of agency, where it is about an individual's power to do things individually in the world without constraint, and start thinking about how, in fact, we all live together in societies and communities, and thus our agency is automatically performed in relation to other people, and in, you know, as many of these chapters demonstrated, not only in relation to other people, but in relation to other powers, you know, in relation to gods, in relation to objects, in relation to you know, all different kinds of things. I think there's a sort of subtly kind of post-human element for me that comes through in some of this, is that those relations extend beyond purely kind of intra-human relations, and are also about how women relate to the world around them and are in relationship with the world around them as part of their agency. So anyway, I feel like I'm kind of rambling now, but thanks so much, Cristina, for your really useful insights and pulling out some of the themes of the volume for us.
Thank you. Well, now we'll give the word to the public if you want to make question by voice or chat. I don't know if also Jacqueline wants to say something.
I have only a reaction. About the book of Zoa and her friends. I find this very inspiring in this time now, because it is a book which result from a conversation, as you have said, and in the context of the United States now and the attack against the science, it seems to me that is a project that could be repeated on I don't know, but it seems that it's a very interesting idea to organize meeting between female researchers by Zoom, and with the result to produce a book written by different speakers from different countries, different languages. So I think you are, it's the first, it seems to me this is very, very good idea.
Thank you. In the end, it was all that was the whole situation. But again, as you were mentioning, the situation is sadly proceeding to the same avenue right now. So actually, I was chatting with Rosa before the meeting, and we were commenting on all these things, and I was thinking, well, again, it would be awesome to find these kind of like little corners to keep thinking and keep motivating our students and keep working on stuff that is being devaluated and demoted and somehow, right?
If I can just
Thank you
say
so
something
much,
very
Jacqueline.
quickly. Oh, sorry. Just to say, merci beaucoup. Thank you so much. I mean, I think, you know, the other thing also upon reflection with what's happening now. I mean, I'm in England, but my home, you know, my home is the United States. And I also find thinking about this project and what we were able to do and the way in which gender is so built into this project that, you know, the current administration would be opposed. This would fall under the category of DEI. And so I just, if I dwell on it, I just start to get very sad and to cry. I mean, I can't, but I do agree. I mean, I think it's a model. I mean, I do think it's a model of collaboration that I think is rare in the academy. I mean, maybe obviously in the sciences, there's, you know, people working on a lab or multiple projects, but I just think in the humanities, things are so individualistic and so dependent on the one single author. For me, this has been one of the most rewarding experiences. And in the end, also, I mean, as I mentioned in my brief sort of, you know, my brief comments, it still looks or it takes the form of what we think we know of an edited volume, but it really isn't. And the bookmark that I think Zoa showed very briefly, the one in Spanish, at least lists, like, it has us all as autoras, as authors. And you know, I really wish Yeah. So, I mean, but, you know, I guess there have been some more collaborative modes in classics. I'm thinking, for example, the Post-Classicisms Collective, and they can call themselves that, but we considered that. But then in the end, you know, each person did put in some work in terms of coming up with that framework. Like for me, again, thinking about geography, I was really interested in race making, or, you know, thinking about racialized bodies, many of whom were female, of course, but how that operated in things that I saw, like, so the 3 sections, you know, city, borders, and conquest were things that I kind of came up with. So we also wanted to acknowledge that intellectual work, even though the examples and the discussion was very much informed by the group. There's still a level of intellectual work that went into the actual structure and the framework. But I wish we had more of these collaborations. And this was also funded by the Spanish Sociedad de Estudios Clásicos, and so it was also a project that came out of Spain, which is also why we're publishing it in Spanish. But it was wonderful. I wish more funders would do this, would enable this. Thank you.
Judith?
Yeah, I just want to reinforce what Jacqueline and Rosa said. And I should mention, I have another epilogue coming out in another volume, also edited by Lewis Webb. I hope we'll get to talk about it at that point. But in both instances, I was one of very few Americans that participated in these incredible collaborative projects. And I do hope we will have more people from my sadly beleaguered country, you know, turning to these international groups as a source of strength and solace. This is where we're going to have to continue this important work on gender and on sexuality and ethnicity and race, in which my fellow country people have played such a huge role and whose future isn't altogether clear. So I just want to thank everybody for bringing this up and say I hope we'll have some more of my fellow Americans involved in projects like this in future.
Thank you. Karolina, thank you.
Yes, I actually had a question for the authors of imprints. Admittedly haven't had a chance to read your book, but I'm looking forward to the digital version coming out now that you've mentioned it. Thank you so much. If I understood correctly, you mentioned that you had sort of looked at contemporary connections or comparisons. I hope I'm not misreading what was said. And if so, what sort of, this may be a bit of a silly question, but what did you find as most surprising in terms of like what that yielded, the comparison to modern theory and modern dance? Yes.
Like Karin, for instance, could reply to you very well, because in her chapter, she uses both contemporary thinking as well as modern practitioners. So maybe you want to say something.
Yes, with pleasure. I mean, specifically to answer your question, I was surprised by actually the continuity of the reflection, really the intellectual exploration on what dance is and what it means to maybe use your body as an object and to interact with material objects. This interest on the part of ancient authors, maybe they were not dancers, but they were they observed this art form and they thought about it, and then I see the same exploration on the part of contemporary dancers. I'm thinking of Elisabeth Streep, who has this thing about falling, the perfect fall, so the perfect letting go of agency. This is a New York choreographer who asks very difficult stunts of her dancers, and this idea that maybe the dancing body, the dancer in control of every single limb and doing very impressive things on the one hand, but then this idea of just letting go of all agency and be an object and see what happens. It's two sides of one coin, and we find it in ancient texts and we find it in modern choreography. So for me, I keep being surprised, actually. Maybe it's partly my interest in certain things and I find them wherever I look, but I'm impressed by the sophistication of the thought on dance then and now.
Thank you.
Efrosini, could you?
Thank you very much. Thank you for these amazing presentations. I have a question regarding female agency in the ancient Mediterranean world. So intersectional approaches are crucial when studying women in the ancient world. So I'm curious about how you applied the framework of intersectionality in your edit volume. Did you take a particular methodological approach to ensure that multiple axes of identity were meaningfully integrated across the contributions? Thank you very much.
You want to go? Oh, shall I go, Karolina? Yeah, that's a really great question. Thank you, Efrosini. I think, I mean, in terms of our framework, we were mostly referring to Kimberlé Crenshaw on intersectionality and you know, that kind of essential idea of intersectionality, that it is not only gender or only race or only class that has an impact on somebody's existence in the world, but that those factors can intersect and kind of create multiplying effects. I think in our editing of the volume, I don't know if it would be fair to say because of the way the volume came about as kind of building on this series, this sort of conference series over time, it was kind of a slow conference that happened over several sessions, which was quite an interesting way of doing things, was we wanted to allow the authors in the volume to explore the topics that they wanted to explore, while also considering the frameworks that we were offering them. And so I think what we really asked the authors in the volume to do was to sort of begin from the point of gender or from the point of womanhood or femaleness, but also to consider what other elements are present in these women's lives. And again, for me, it comes back to the point about collectiveness and relationality, which was where we were, you know, some of these case studies are still talking about women who, you know, I was going to say women who didn't represent all of the women of their time and place. I don't think any woman or person represents all of the people of their time and place, do they? But who are still sort of perhaps exceptional in some way, but are exceptional in a more collective way or something like that. And that is often to do with class or to do with, I think class is probably the one that is most prominent. But yeah, I think from the editor's perspective, it was about asking our authors to sort of take that extra step on top of only considering the gendered aspect, to consider what else is allowing these women to explore agency. I mean, just to take one example, one of the chapters that I worked closely on was Paula Tati's chapter on late antique letters in monastic contexts. And I think there, I mean, not that it would necessarily be considered an intersectional element in Crenshaw's, maybe it would, I don't know. I can't remember my Crenshaw very well off the top of my head. But the sort of religious context is immediately important to the women in that chapter, because it's about the access they have to the religious figures who they're writing to, and that is what facilitates their agency in, I'm going to say exploiting, I don't mean that in a negative sense, but in kind of making use of those relationships. Anyway, I should stop talking, I'm still talking, but yes, thank you very much for the question.
Well, thank you all. You still have 7 minutes. I would like just to say that there is a lot of comments in the chat. Congratulations from many people. And one comment by Honey Ancona about also the publication in Spanish. and giving congratulations for this. And I was just wondering when Zoe said that how difficult is to translate into Spanish, something that you have worked so much, but sometimes the lack of words of palavras. And for me, the word dance, I found very curious how to use, because all the chapters in the book are abstract words. And this is also an abstract, but it's so connected to gesture, to movement, to body. And I was just wondering about an image of Brazil abroad when a French film, Orpheus, won the prize in 60s at Cannes, and the comment about the women that were in the slums in Rio de Janeiro walking, and they said they don't walk, they dance. So this category of dancing, how you can use in such a large and abstract also way, and perhaps how difficult it is to connect to movements that you think as dancing, but for that culture is not dancing, or is a war, or like Honey said in the last comment, it's also, for instance, a way of fall. This is just a general comment, if you could say some words. And for me, particularly this book, and I thank you for sending to me, Sarah is not here, but her chapter on body was so interesting to see the meaning of kinaidos in other cultures, and how you can reread, for instance, Plato, think in another way of, for instance, kinaidos. This was very, for me, from philosophy, to use body to think, then even how Plato, for instance, in Symposium, criticized Diotima, criticized the body, all the colors, all the things that are material in her discourse, how it changed our perspective in, for instance, philosophy. It was that. Thank you.
Thank you so much. You're all giving us so wonderful questions that indeed prove the fact that we wanted to keep talking about all these wonderful things. Sorry, first of all, because my internet connection keeps failing all the time. So this is why I feel I seem to be so stressed, because it goes down. So I think it is a wonderful remark, and it was very difficult to translate, since the title, those imprints, those traces are not always the same, even in Spanish. Sometimes I was like, no, imprint is not the word here. I need to use something else. So what we did in the end, we had a wonderful translator, Candela de Lorenzo, but in the end, I had to rewrite many of the sections, because it was better to just like start from scratch and to tell the same things and to tell the essence than to have a translation. So there are many passages where you won't see the traces of the English version behind, because it was difficult to follow that, like spectatorship, that we don't have in Spanish, so it was terrible. Or performance, the term performance is very complicated. So all these terms that English has been working on for the past 20 years. Dance studies was born in the United States, it was born in the UK, in Germany, but we didn't have those words, kinesthesia. So we've tried to copy them, to incorporate them. Sometimes it's simply impossible. And then there's the gender issue. Of course, I was super happy to say las autoras, right? Because it was like, okay, here we are. But sometimes the dancer, so Sarah, are you speaking about a he dancer, a she dancer? So there were many conversations in that regard, because in Spanish, you really need to go for the gender and to specify what kind of person is you're mentioning. And that abstractness of English, which is wonderful when you say the dancer. It's like, okay, now what do I do in Spanish, right? It's very complicated. So thank you, Maria Cecilia, because that was the past 2 years I've been doing only this, and it's like writing a whole new project, and with the aid of all my colleagues, of course. But as I was saying, you can see Karin's German or Laura's Italian, that English, and that was so beautiful. You know, I felt like when I am speaking English, I feel like a mercenary. Okay, I'm now speaking a language which is not mine, but when I was translated into Spanish, it was like, oh, this is my own language. I have to. So I had those feelings as an author as well, you know. So
Thank you. Thank you, Judith, for the reference to the Cnidus too. Well, it's now 1 minute to close to keep the time, the hour. So I would like to thank you all very much, speakers, participants. My heartfelt thanks for you for taking your time to participate in this cycle of my meetings. And I would like to give the floor to Jacqueline to also to say the last words.
No. Thank you for all of us. It was very interesting. And okay. And enjoy to see again Ruth Webb, even by Zoom.
Okay. Well, thank you all them. And this meeting was recorded, and you are going to put on the YouTube of EuGeStA channel, so you have access to it, and all the other people who are not able to come and are interested in this subject. So thank you very much. Goodbye.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Obrigado.
De nada.
Thank you very much, all of you.
muchas gracias. Bye bye.
Bye bye.
Gracias. Bye.